كده جاهزين؟ Minutes, Jazeera folks, they're coming. They're on their way. So just give us 1 to 2 minutes. They should be here. Yeah. No, they're coming. They're on their way, or they're here already. Yeah? Okay. طيب. شوف المصور. I would like to welcome everyone. The language will be in Arabic today. So, we're flexible on the language. So we try to see, the audience and the speakers and where the preference is. So today we'll have Arabic language. We have translation, of course. So please use your translation if you need translation to English. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this event organized by Brookings Doha Center about the situation in Yemen. I would like to thank everyone for coming here and for being interested in this country that means a lot for all of us. This country, the Yemen, of which we were very much proud of its peaceful revolution in 2011, the 11th of February. And at this occasion, I would like to remind of the peaceful Yemeni revolution that took place in February 2011. And the anniversary of which is the 5th anniversary is this week. And it had kept and maintained its peaceful march for 2 years, despite the many oppressive actions against it and the revolutionary people, and from the different, despite the oppression that was exercised on the people on the streets, but the Yemeni wisdom had the upper hand, and we had always said that the Yemeni wisdom is always there in all occasions, not only the beginning of the revolution. Yemen is a dear country for all in this region of the world, and it means a lot for everybody. That's why everybody is interested in the Yemeni situation, and we pray to God that Yemen will overcome its present crisis, and we will once again see the emergence of the Yemeni wisdom. We are honored by your presence today here in this symposium about the situation in Yemen, and about the vision, the future vision about Yemen, where things are going, and what would be the exit, and what is in the perspective. I'm honored to be hosting 3 experts, politicians, and journalists, and in fact scholars in the Yemeni issues to discuss Yemen and its situation and the crisis there. I am happy to extend my thanks to all of them, the 3 of them, for coming here and to be part of the Yemeni public and audience who are interested in this topic. And also I would like to draw your attention that the media, Al Jazeera Mubashir, is covering this event, and so we'd like to thank them. We will speak in the beginning by giving 7 to 8 to 10 minutes to each panelist to give us their visions and their evaluation of the present situation. and where things are going, and to have a future look at Yemen's situation. Everybody who follows the different symposiums about Yemen that we organize, we usually focus on the constructive side. We don't criticize for the sake of criticism. No, we focus on solutions, on positive things, on how one can go forward to find positive solutions for the crises. This is the line of thought that we always adhere to, and that's why I wish that we should try to find solutions, to find a future vision that will help us to find a solution to these crises. And today we're, of course, focusing on the Yemen crisis. I would like to begin with His Excellency the Minister, the former Minister of Youth and Sport in Yemen, Mr. Ra'fat Al-Akhal, who will give us an idea about his vision about Yemen and the Yemeni situation. Mr. Ra'fat was Minister of Sport and Youth in Yemen, and he is at the present time a non-resident fellow in Rafiq Hariri Center and the Atlantic Council in Washington, and he is a consultant to many organizations, international organizations that are interested in development and reconstruction, including IBM and other international organizations that focus on development and construction. Mr. Rafat, please tell us, what is your vision? How do you see the future of Yemen? Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you for hosting us. Definitely, it is difficult and it's painful these days to speak about Yemen because it's a very complicated matter. In the beginning, maybe we should first remember all those who were killed in this war and to pray for the health, the recovery of all the injured people. I would like to begin by a phrase that was pronounced by one of the young Yemenis in an interview with BBC. He's from Taz. They asked him about the future and how he saw the future. So his answer was, which future are you talking about? There is no future. There is no hope. This is the phrase that he repeated, there's no hope. In this way, he summarized what millions of Yemeni youth think who don't see in front of them any prospect of solution. You just said that this month is the 5th anniversary of the peaceful revolution of the Yemeni people. So maybe it is useful to see what changes took place since 2011 today. And it's important to follow the general discourse that is, or the public narrative that is that is in our society. In the beginning, the terminology was all full of changes, hope, modern state, justice, equal citizenship, a future. All the terminology that was used was that positive and optimistic one. Because one felt very positive about the future at the time. Now, we want to look into the future, we find there is a big change. The terminology used nowadays in the public narrative is a polarizing terminology. That's to say that there is a lot of sectarism in it, regionalism, a lot of extremism, and a lot of pessimism and frustration. That's why these are the terminology that are controlling or overshadowing all the public discourse or narrative. Unfortunately, today, if I am one of the thousand, if those who were killed during this war, maybe now they are in a better situation than those who are still alive, or whether be injured or displaced people, or one of the 21 million people who need urgent help, who urgently need food, medicine, healthcare. Nowadays, you must live while you see that your future is collapsing in front of your own eyes. You live without having any hopes, anything, ideas about the future. And this is why it's dangerous. It is dangerous to lose hope. Because when we reach this point of no future, no hope, many of the young people have only two choices, either waiting to die in their own houses or to go and meet death in another place and face it. For millions of Yemeni youth, this is the only choice they have, in fact. They don't have any other way out. Anybody who had a job, he lost his job. Anyone whose father had a job, his father lost the job. The economy has completely collapsed. I remember a letter I received about 2 weeks ago from one of these young people that I had helped about a year and a half ago to get a job. He sent me a letter thanking me. He said that he's still at his work. He said, if I hadn't had this job, I would have joined one of the fighting groups. If nobody nowadays has any opportunity to work, one of the fighting groups would attract him and would ask him to join. So the question that was raised in the beginning of this session was, what is the perspectives or the prospects of this crisis in Yemen, and how it could end, what can be done? Maybe the question should be, what can be done more than how's the future until the war comes to an end, until the hostilities come to an end? What can be done to keep just a little bit of hope within the youth that they might have a future? How can we make sure that there is a minimum of economy until this crisis is over and the military decide to put an end to this military action? That's why I think we have a big responsibility to focus on creating job opportunities, even temporary ones, focusing on positive narrative that keeps people attached to life, attached to the future. Maybe 10 months, 11 months is not a short period for a person who is in a situation that cannot have the basic things in life for himself and his family. And we also have the responsibility of finding for businessmen in Yemen and the capital some hope, because today most or almost all the Yemeni businessmen left the country and sent them money out, and they're now investing in Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, Malaysia, and in the African corn in Ethiopia, Kenya. The Yemeni investments are all there. So how can we make sure at least to have a minimum of a desire within these businessmen to come to stay in the country or to come back if they are not if they will not be compensated for the losses they had, and if they are not part of the future? If we do not do this, if the Yemeni investors don't come back to their country, foreign ones won't come, of course, also. So I think focusing on these initiatives and these opportunities is what can be done today. And in fact, yesterday I had spoken about this with another symposium about the job opportunity creation in conflict zones. And I gave a simple example about some farmers in Dama who had to mortgage their personal weapons in return of irrigation equipment, and that thanks to a simple program that was implemented in the organization and give them the two choices, that they can continue planting and agriculture by giving up their weapons. These are hopeful examples, and people know that they can continue to normal life. We must focus on such examples. Unfortunately, the support given to such projects and such ideas is very little, very small, and one doesn't focus on them. That's why what I wish is that we should work, all of us, one way or the other, to change the way and the narrative. In a way, it becomes more focused on the future and less than looking to the back to the past. A narrative that keeps a space of hope for the people, and people must know that there is a plan for the period post the crisis, and people must know that there are so many people, many countries that are thinking for what the period of post-war. But if we continue thinking the mentality of war and the conflict and the disasters that are taking place during the war, I don't think that would lead to any positive thing in the future. So my recommendation is that how can we all focus on economy and maintaining the hope for the youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for reminding us of hope and the future of Yemen. And I think talking about these aspects is very important for our future vision, so that the parties or the Yemenis won't be pushed further away from hope and away from the future. At least this is emblematic of perhaps a better future, a prosperous future. We ought not to turn a blind eye on the optimistic view to overcome this stage. I will move now to Iona Craig. The lady is a journalist. She's an expert, gloves on expert. She knows Yemen closely, and she is very close to the Yemeni situation. She's been there since 2010, and before then she went also to Yemen, and we were honored to have the lady here because we talked about her expertise, her writings, her essays in plenty of journals, the Los Angeles Times, the US Today, as well as the Foreign Policy, the Time magazine, and further. Indeed, she is a household name, and she present her views from the ground, albeit I think she's an Irish woman or a British. She writes from Sana'a, she writes from Aden, she writes from the ground. I'd like to thank you for your participation, and I would like just to allude to the fact that Iona is a lecturer in the City of London, City University of London. She lectures in this domain. Thank you. Please, the floor is yours. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for holding this event today, particularly in the English-speaking media. Unfortunately, Yemen is one of the most underreported conflicts at the moment, which means the voice of the civilians on the ground is not really getting heard, and also those more important discussions of what the future holds are rarely happening. So thank you. I have spent about 5 months on the ground in Yemen since the war began. As already mentioned, I was living there before. I don't like to think myself as a Yemen expert, a specialist maybe, because I think almost the more you get to know Yemen, sometimes even the more confusing it can be. But from what I have seen on the ground, I reported from both sides of the front line. I crossed the front line, the fighting lines, more than half a dozen times last year. So I probably have, I hope, a better perspective from both parts or many parts of the conflict now. But it is absolutely clear that the biggest losers in all of this are the civilian population of Yemen, not just from a humanitarian perspective, but that this conflict is tearing the society apart. You now have conflicts that are being fought at a very local level for very personal reasons a lot of the time. It is tearing families apart as well. And I think this is one of the, you're trying to be optimistic, I know, but saddest things that I have seen over the last year is how really the very fabric of Yemeni society is being undermined. And even neighbors who had trusted each other and been friends for many decades are now enemies. I therefore find it very hard to be optimistic about the future in the sense of bringing an end to this conflict anytime soon from what I've seen on the ground. But the process by how that happens is equally very important because this conflict has become so fractured. Now you're dealing with multiple groups on the ground that are all fighting for very different reasons. I think, as you know, the media narrative is very easy to push people into the one side of the pro-Houthis or the anti-Houthis, but just because you're fighting on one side doesn't actually mean you're supporting the aims and the goals of the side you are fighting along. Therefore, when it comes to whether it be ceasefires, political negotiations, or a way to end this conflict, I see it that it has to be a much more inclusive process. It has to include more of the factions who are actually fighting on the ground, not just the big players and the political elite, because otherwise it's not going to work. If everybody is even at a more senior level able to reach some kind of agreement on just a ceasefire, let's say, that's never going to take place on the ground if you're not communicating with and dealing with all the different factions involved. And of course, the longer the conflict goes on, the more and more fractured it's going to become, and the more and more difficult, therefore, it is to get it to end. I think the other issue is, because of my lack of optimism, perhaps, it's very hard to see when this conflict will come to an end or come to a close. But the most important thing in the meantime is the humanitarian situation. As mentioned, the civilians are suffering massively in the middle of all of this. And as you said at the beginning, it's not about putting blame on one side or the other. This is a war. There is no good side in all of this. But my concern is, obviously, having seen it on the ground, is it's the use of food as a weapon, really. The restriction of access to access for humanitarian aid and food supplies. I was in Aden during the siege. I was in Taiz during the siege. And I've also seen the impact of the blockades on the entire country as well. It was very good to hear, actually, yesterday, the UN declaring that this new process is due to start now of authorization by an independent body in Djibouti to try and restart commercial imports into Yemen. This is incredibly important, both going back to what you were just saying now about trying to put some lifeblood into the economy, but also trying to provide food for Yemenis. The aid agencies, the UN agencies cannot feed 25 million people. And Yemen relies on those commercial imports. So that's certainly a positive. It's a step in the right direction. And I really hope, for the sake of Yemenis on the ground, that it does mean that commercial imports can restart again on a regular basis in order to make it easier for the civilian population. I find it very sort of heartbreaking to see what is happening to Yemen right now. And it makes it very difficult to see, even from that commercial aspect, how things can change most immediately. There has been a huge amount of destruction across the country, both as a result of infrastructure damage, as well as from the fighting just on the ground. And the longer this goes on, the more the population is going to suffer. We already know now that there's more than 2.5 million people have been displaced by the conflict. All of those figures, both of those who are dying, both those who have been displaced, are going to continue to rise the longer this conflict goes on. And I really hope today, perhaps, we have an opportunity to tease out some of the more practical options of what happens next. I don't think, certainly, any Yemenis that I've spoken to on the ground are optimistic about this conflict ending anytime soon. And therefore, I think to somehow ease the pressure on the civilian population, there has to be a real focus on the humanitarian side. Because whatever happens in the war, the humanitarian aspect has to be central to anything that happens. And there has been an aspect of using, whether it be food or other humanitarian aid, as some form of bargaining chip in the political process. I know friends at the UN who are very concerned about this, and I would hold a concern about that as well, using the lifting of a siege or lifting of a blockade as a goodwill measure in the political process is entirely wrong. The food supply should not be a politicized element in the conflict. And I really hope that now, as I say, the UN have made this announcement yesterday, that commercial imports may have a chance of resuming into Yemen, and it will help everybody. I think as time goes on, the fracturing within society will become worse and worse. Again, I'm sorry to be so pessimistic. But we've seen from the fallout of 2011, now looking back at the anniversary as we are now, the problems that arise with a non-inclusive process. And I think now this is an opportunity to perhaps learn from some of the mistakes that have been made in the past, and to try and create a more inclusive process going forward with all the different factions that are now involved in Yemen. I have to say on an optimistic note, some of the youth and the young people that I have met, both in Taiz and in Aden and also in Sana'a, who are trying to keep going despite what is happening on the ground. Particularly in Aden during the siege there, I spent some time with a group of young doctors. They were recent university graduates, many of them women. A lot of their superiors had left because of the conflict and because of the level of fighting in the city. There was a complete lack of senior medical staff, surgeons, and doctors in the city at that time. And these young graduates who were not getting paid, they were in their mid-20s, were determined to keep going, to keep trying to provide healthcare to the local population who were in dire need at the time. And they did it at a huge amount of risk to their own lives. So there are large parts of society who are prepared to keep going and to keep trying despite the events on the ground pushing back and going against them, and to take huge amounts of risks in order to do so. And just going back to what has already been said, I think it's really crucial to try and support those groups at a local level, whether it be doctors in the case that I'm talking about, or other civil society members, to try and support them during this time of war is incredibly important, to try and build on that optimism and build on what is basically the youth population who are trying to support now a severely collapsing health system.
شكرا إيانا على هذه المداخلة والتركيز.
Thank you very much, Iona, for this intervention. You have focused indeed on the humanitarian issue and the humanitarian aid to have an access, especially when we see the humanitarian side is deteriorating. You are focused as well on the inclusive process, the inclusivity of what takes place, and the efforts that might pour into that. And thank you very much. We'll move now to Brother Rajah Badi. He will be presenting his view and perhaps the mechanisms of having a leeway or an exit strategy, and how he sees the future. Brother Rajah is or does represent the Yemeni government. He is the spokesperson of the technocrat government since its establishment 2014, and the Government of Unity Accord, and he was actually, or he is, the advisor for the Yemeni Prime Minister since 2012. Rajah, he is the head of the unit of measuring the public opinion since 2007, and he is also a member of the International Journalists Association and the Arab one. We are happy to listen to the assessment, the official assessment, perhaps as a spokesperson and an advisor. Please, the floor is yours. Good evening. I am very glad to be amongst you in this evening to talk about Yemen. However, I always say here the title is to do with what's to be done. I think before answering this question, we need to answer another question. What has brought us here in the first place? I just wanted to brief you about this part of the question, and then we can talk about what's to be done during this catastrophic era. And I'll provide you with some numbers that are accurate vis-a-vis the humanitarian situation in Yemen. It is the 5th anniversary of the revolution, and I would like to say that indeed, since the beginning, it was a peaceful protest. Ali Abdullah Saleh attempted to lure everybody to the violence and to throw spanners in the work, and indeed he wanted a fight. The war was postponed from 2011. Saleh wanted it in 2011, however, it was postponed until 2015. In 2011, there was a balance of power, and there was a division, a societal one and a military one. We had a division in the military. Some forces leaned towards Saleh, and others leaned towards the youth revolution. This balance of power has led to the fact that everybody agreed for Saleh to step down. In return, Saleh will have the immunity. Indeed, we delved into a transitional period. 10 countries supported such transition, the Gulf states as well as the P5. And this transition period was smooth. We had in place a technocrat government, or the government of national accord. Saleh had half of it. And then we had the National Dialogue Conference with the UN participation and an envoy that was there. As a matter of fact, Yemen staved off the problems, especially ensnaring into war. When the National Dialogue Conference ended, we had drafted a new constitution. Unfortunately, there were some intersecting interests, the Ali Abdullah Saleh's interest or agenda, as well as the Houthis. As you know, Houthis is on a par with the Qaeda. They are ideologues. They think that they have a divine right to rule the Yemen. So indeed, Saleh met with the Houthis. They used to be foes in the future. 6 wars were waged against each other. From Saada, the Houthis moved and they conquered Amran, the suburbs of Sana'a, and they controlled, actually, it was a coup. On the 21st of September 2014, there was a coup when the Houthis conquered Sana'a and posed or imposed on the president to have another government in place, and there was the peaceful and partnership accord that was signed at that time, but under the guns threat. Khalid Bahah was the head of the government. The Houthis agreed to him, but the government's work stalled within the first 60 days, and then the president resigned, the premier resigned. The president was under house arrest, and that was known as a full-fledged coup. The Houthis had a constitutional declaration. A higher committee was formed away from the permission of the president. They dissolved the parliament. Indeed, it was a full-fledged coup. The president of the republic escaped to Aden, and then military jets of Houthis and Saleh bombarded his palace in Aden. And this is a brief of what took place in Yemen. I just wanted to describe the situation in Yemen. It wasn't to do with a civil war as on a par with Lebanon. However, it was to do with the balances of powers and the disintegration of power. And it was a coup that is frank and clear. The premier was toppled, the parliament was dissolved, and the arms were used for military gains. We delved into the National Dialogue Conference, and the Houthis participated in the National Dialogue Conference. As I said, it was facilitated by the United Nations as well as the 10 other countries. The Houthis agreed to the outcomes of the National Dialogue Conference. Indeed, these outcomes tackled all the prickly issues at the time, most of which was to do with the southern Yemen and the Saada. The Houthis did not like the outcomes perhaps later on, and they resorted to the arms in order to have their say politically in Yemen.
Was a brief description of what brought us to this stage, because somebody had led a military coup d'etat and exploited the political process at the country at the time that the country was just putting its first steps on the right track. At the time, everybody was saying that maybe Yemen will be a new experience that is different from the Arab Spring countries' experiences. But the usage of guns and weapons by the Houthis and Saleh led to the undermining all that. We could have well avoided the war in Yemen, but after all that happened and the control of the Houthis on Sana'a and their attempts to control the other provinces such as Hodeidah, Shabwa, Aden, so they invaded all the provinces, even those that are of different sectarian tendencies. They are the Zaydis, and also they attacked the Shafi'is. So the President of the Republic asked his brothers from the Saudi Arabia to intervene to save legitimacy of the country and from being controlled by a specific group that holds the arms at the expense of the other groups of the country. And that's why the Arab coalition was created and the Storm of Resolve was created. And on 26th of March, it will be its first anniversary. I will give you some statistics, official ones, about the humanitarian and economic situation that resulted from the Houthis coup d'etat against the legitimate government. And on, I will give you some quick numbers. The general income of revenues of the state decreased by 45.5% in 2015 compared to what were in the same period in 2014 before the Houthi attack. The revenues of gas and petroleum also decreased by more than 52% in 2015. there was a deficit in the budget, and that increased from 170 billion riyals to 309 billion riyals compared to the year before. The reserve of the central bank of foreign currency were decreased in 2015 since 14 to its lower levels. It's only no more than 1.6 billion billions. As for the humanitarian situation, 6 million Yemenis are now under the threshold of poverty, and this is not acceptable by all laws, regional and international. We are now on the political track. What can be done to Yemen in this political track? In Yemen, there is a coup d'etat, and there are decisions from the national community that speaking about rejecting this coup d'etat, speaking about a political settlement. I think that any political settlement without the implementation of the Security Council resolutions about what happened in Yemen, especially 2216, is only postponement of the conflict to another round where it will be even fiercer and tougher. If we want really to save Yemen, the international community must implement the international resolutions. There are 3 resolutions of Security Council about Yemen, last of which are 2216. Speaking about any political settlement that guarantees to one side to achieve what they wanted to impose by weapons means that the international community will accept the chaos that will come to the region when any party that has military power can impose their will. This means we are accepting a new sort of legitimacy, which is that of the jungle, because the one that has the force or the military might should not be enabled to impose their will, just as was the case in Iraq. We have a group of people that have weapons and they control all the camps, military camps of the state, and they have a sort of divine right to rule the country, the family, the Houthis. And that's why I think if we really want to achieve peace and save Yemen from what it's suffering from, we must all push for the implementation of the Security Council resolutions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and I thank the panelists for focusing on the humanitarian aspects and the future and development aspects, because this is interesting for all of us, and is interesting for the Syrian, for the Yemeni people also at the present time, because they want to have an idea about how the situation is and what should be the future be like. Now, I will ask the panelists and try to cover the aspects that need to be clarified in a greater way. I begin with the question to Mr. Rajah, because he was the last one to speak about this crisis. My question, Mr. Rajah, what kind of political solution for the present crisis in Yemen? How long this situation will continue in Yemen? Is there a vision? What's this vision? You are in the government, and you are part of the decision makers on the side, the official Yemeni side. So, should we wait or count on, or are we going to see a military decisive action in the near future? Are we going to see some political talks that put an end to the crisis? How long this crisis will continue? How do you see? What do you want to tell us about what to expect from the political aspects in this crisis. And also related to this, you are in Aden now, and Aden is under your control for a long time. So have you begun reconstructing it? Are there any efforts exerted in Yemen to have a sort of base that will lead the development and reconstruction process in the future? What have you achieved so far in reconstruction of Aden, and what do you think of political future settlement or solution? As for the political settlement, I think we as a legitimate government, the war was imposed on us. We did not want to have this war at all. That's why the state avoided any conflicts and clashes with the Houthis until they left to remote places. The state had always wanted to have some agreements with the Houthis, but they did not want any settlement or any agreement, any political state. We in Yemen, if you want to, one cannot. There are some bases that all Yemenis agree with. We have the outcomes of the national dialogue, and even the Houthis themselves took part actively in this dialogue and its outcomes. We have a legitimacy and we have resolutions of the United Nations which are known well and accepted by Yemenis and others. As for the Gulf Initiative, the Houthis didn't accept it in the beginning. These are the three bases that might be the basis for any solution. But any solution that keeps the weapons in the hands of the Houthis will mean it is a useless solution and will not lead to a political process in Yemen. The process that is being done now and the pressure on on us now to ceasefire is only false talk and untrue talk because they want to pray for even a harsher and stronger war, because Houthis as well, they want just some time to rest and to regain their forces. So they are not serious, really. They are not serious in wanting peace and achieving peace. And the proof that the history of the 6 wars that Saleh had launched against the Houthis, they used to go to have settlements and ceasefires, but then the Houthis would regain and recommence the fighting. The problem is that one political side obtains and has the weapons. The Houthis now have a lot of weapons and weaponry. They have taken all the weapons of the army, the national army of Yemen. All this weaponry that was accumulated for 50 years is now under the hands of the Houthis because they have confiscated it and seized it. And so they want to impose their vision by the usage of these weapons. So if the Houthis are not disarmed and if they are not back to what they were, that's to say a political organization, not a military one, there will be no real peace in Yemen, because if the Houthis have the weapons, because the weapons should be in the hands of the state, of the government, not any political party. That's why after the storm of resolve, the government went to the Geneva 1 and 2 negotiations. Geneva 2 led to agreement on Geneva 3 on the 14th of January. But we were surprised by a new position by Saleh and the Houthis of rejecting the resumption of negotiations. So they don't want really a political solution, because the Houthis have some demands that are different from that of Saleh, while as they are one coalition. the Houthis want to rule over Yemen, while Saleh has some personal ambitions and for himself and family in the future, not for himself. So I think the differences between Saleh and the Houthis is about their political demands, and this is part of the complication and the complexity of the present situation. And this was in fact announced publicly by Abdelmak al-Houthi when he said he's ready to fight until doomsday, while as Saleh said he's ready to negotiate with the Saudis.
في مسألة عدن.
I know that some are interested in what goes in Aden and the presence of ISIS in Aden as well as the Qaeda. Would you please talk about the presence of ISIS in Aden? Have you noticed the movements, and did they emerge at the expense of Al-Qaeda? We knew that the non-state actors that moved in Yemen were confined to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which were present in the Hadramaut Governorate and Al-Mukalla. But nowadays, we have noticed that there is an ISIS presence in Aden. What's your comment, please? And do you think that the clout of Daesh or ISIS is burgeoning? And how do you link it with the reconstruction of Aden? First and foremost, I need to emphasize the fact that when Aden was liberated, it was nearly destructed. The destruction that befell Aden is unimaginable. No one can explain in words unless he or she were present on the ground, because there was revengeful acts that took place, especially Aden. The Houthis wanted to revenge, especially the Aden area and Taz, on the part of the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, because he had issues with Taiz. Taiz was the platform of the revolution, and Aden was the backbone of the southern movement, which some of them calls for a federal government of two parts, and some of them think that they need to have autonomy and so on and so forth. We, as a national government, we said frankly, when we went to Aden, we said that the state declares to the Yemenis that we cannot recriminate and we cannot build Taz because the government's coffers are empty. We called for an international conference to reconstruct Yemen, and now with the cooperation with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf countries, there are some arrangements to launch an international donors conference. What we need, actually, simply speaking, is to the tune of Yemen needs a primary sum to the tune of $60 to $65 billion. And here we are talking about a government, we as a legitimate government based in Aden, and here I need to be transparent, we don't have $1,000, if you could imagine. So we are penniless, basically, we are broke. And what kind of future is there for Yemen if our coffers are empty? The international community ought to help Yemen. What took place in Aden and the ISIS question, after liberating Aden, the government had no sway. It did not, or was not capable of providing services because of the lack, not even the lack, the non-existence of money. As you know, ISIS emerged, and what took place in Yemen was linked to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Jalal Bilaidi, Qasim al-Raybi, and these were leaders, Nasser al-Wahishi. They were infamous people, and they used to have their own narrative, and they used to present Al-Qaeda. The first emergence of ISIS, Aden, was occupied by the Houthis. When it was occupied by the Houthis, ISIS was not there, despite the fact that the Houthis declared that they wanted to fight ISIS. And ISIS declared that they are fighting the Houthis because the Houthis are Shiite and they are the enemy from within. So ISIS was on the sidelines when the Houthis were there. However, when we liberated it, ISIS indeed targeted the headquarters of the government in the Al-Qasr hotel, and it was a huge explosion, and we had a close shave at that time because everyone was about to perish. We discovered that there were different ISIS and different Al-Qaeda in the Yemen. If I want to be frank, I would say that there are plenty of actors that have political wing, but they work in Aden under the umbrella of ISIS.
لقد
and it's the humanitarian situation is very difficult now, and you're on the ground and you saw many things. Now, when we talk about the humanitarian crisis, probably the thing that comes to my mind, and probably to many, always the first thing comes to mind is Taiz, right? Taiz, the situation, the humanitarian crisis at Taiz has reached unprecedented levels. Under siege, being bombarded constantly, the crisis has gone for so long in Taiz. What is going on there? Why isn't there a solution to the humanitarian crisis in Taiz? And what is happening to that? Because we know that the United Nations tried to channel some of the humanitarian assistance from Djibouti through Hodeidah port in order to deliver humanitarian assistance to Taiz, but the situation has not changed. And since also you're in Sana'a, on the humanitarian level as well there, what can you talk about? What can you tell us about this? And also, I'm sorry to be asking too many questions, but also, how do you relate this to the international community? You write for USA Today, for Time, you have a strong presence internationally. We don't see any international action or talks even about Yemen. What is going on with the international community when we talk about Yemen? Is it a forgotten country, a forgotten case? What is going on there, and what is happening on the international level? Thank you.
Just to start on the Taiz aspect, there has obviously been a siege of the city, but similar to what happened in Aden before, it's like a trickle effect. So some food or supplies are able to get in. The majority of those are smuggled in. We now know that's happening by the donkey tracks, for example, going through the mountains, or people are able to smuggle things just in small quantities in their cars. From what I understand, the situation has got slightly better since January. There have been some aid officially been allowed in that both the ICRC have brought in and the UN. But those are very intermittent. This is not a regular supply of whether it be medical supplies or humanitarian aid into Taiz. And it is being, as I mentioned before, being used as a weapon. The food, the medical care, humanitarian aid, and again, as we saw in January, it was unfortunately being used as a confidence-building measure as part of the political talks, which I think is a major issue, and it just shouldn't be happening, really. as far as the fighting is concerned in Taiz, it's really reached a stalemate. When I was in Taiz in September, and I crossed into the center of the city, and I spoke to the deputy governor, and he said, actually, we don't want the coalition to come and help us. They can give us weapons, they can airdrop us weapons. We don't want their troops coming in to help us now. Now, I think that probably situation has changed as it's gone on for longer and longer. They do want more support and have had more support. But yes, there has been no major gains or losses by either side. And it's literally meters over meters. So overnight, one side will gain 150 meters, and the next day they will lose it again. And it's relentless. For the people that are living there, it's unending. The start of fighting was quite different, I found, in Taiz to Aden. You know, there wouldn't be any fighting during the day, largely, and then they'd all start fighting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and fight till the morning. Whereas in Aden, it was much more brutal and ruthless and was continuous. And as already mentioned, the destruction in Aden was quite shocking and unbelievable when I went there. But yes, I think the humanitarian organizations in the UN have obviously been trying to keep pushing, trying to get aid in as much as possible and as regularly as possible. But there's 200,000 people now stuck in Taiz who don't have regular access to water, food, and medical care. You know, even the family that I stayed with, they couldn't remember the last time they'd washed, for example, because of the water issue. They have to go outside of the center of the town to territory that's under control of the Houthis in order to be able to get water. And then a lot of the time, they either have to try and smuggle it back or they can't bring it back at all. And it's just day-to-day living, therefore, for people is literally just getting water and food is a struggle. Not to mention the need for basic medical care. And then, of course, adding on to that, you've got a conflict and you've got injured people and casualties who also need emergency health care. So yes, there isn't really an obvious end to what's happening in Taiz. There was an attempt last year to negotiate a deal at a local level between the Houthi Saleh forces on one side and the resistance on the other. Unfortunately, that didn't really take hold, but I think it's probably an indication that those kind of negotiations can go on. But again, as I already mentioned at the beginning, the more things fracture, the more difficult it becomes to get all those factions together and agree on the ground to some form of ceasefire, even if it's just to let the humanitarian stuff in. But yes, the conflict in Taiz now has been going on for many, many, many months, and it hasn't really improved, although there's some indication that perhaps more supplies are able to get through in the last month anyway, but it's not clear how long that might continue. On the coverage front, yeah, it's been very frustrating as a journalist, the lack of interest and even the lack of journalists on the ground. It has been incredibly difficult for international journalists in particular and local journalists as well to operate in Yemen at the moment. It's very difficult for people from outside of the country to get in. I had to go in by boat on 2 occasions. I was stopped from going in, and then I was unable to leave as well, and ended up staying 2 months longer than I wanted to. So yes, it's very difficult access-wise for the international media to get in. And of course, that does drive the conversation, whether we like it or not. If politicians, whether it be in Washington, in Europe, or in London, are reading about this conflict on a regular basis in the national newspapers or hearing about it on the television, then it generates and pushes the political conversation as well. But it's just not happening. There are very few regular media reporting in the English-speaking press from the ground. I mean, that unfortunately has long been the case in Yemen anyway. It's always been the poorer brother or sister in the media narrative of the region, and that has continued in this conflict. But of course, you know, the international community have also taken a side in this conflict as well. So that tends to drive the narrative on one side or the other as well. But yes, for me as a journalist, I would like to say, you know, getting better access is obviously important, and often the reasons for not giving us that access is for your own safety. But I think most of us are old enough and mature enough, as are our media organizations, to make that decision for ourselves. Because yes, again, we are there really to give a voice to the civilians, I hope, and to get their voices heard by the rest of the world. And it's incredibly important that you do that. because most people, certainly in the English-speaking world, have very little idea of what's going on in Yemen and the dire situation, particularly on the humanitarian level, and how important it is to try and find some sort of political solution to the whole conflict.
Thank you يونا، أشكرك على هذه الإجابة وتحديدا بالمجموعة الدولية، وسأبقى مع المجموعة الدولية أيضا لأننا بحاجة إلى إيضاحات أكثر عن الموقف الدولي من هذه.
We need further illustrations. Indeed, we don't listen much. However, let me ask Mr. Ratford from the international group. Where is Iran in what takes place? Perhaps it is the elephant in the room. We heard that there is an alliance between the Houthis and the Iranians. Is that true? Where is Iran from all this? I do think that the Iranian role up to this moment is a negative one vis-à-vis Yemen by and large. And we haven't seen any positive movements from Iran regarding Yemen. And thus I think that we cannot allow a role for Iran to be played in the future. There are some people who talk about a settlement that ought to be linked with the Saudi-Iranian understanding. However, Iran has nothing to do with Yemen. It is too far. We cannot give her this role in the future. So I think this door ought to be shut down or to be closed. However, you posed an important question that relates to the humanitarian aid and the reconstruction efforts in Aden and in different areas. There is a very important point that relates to coordination, the coordination between the donors. As you know, in Yemen we have a problem of coordination between the OECD donors and the Gulf donors. In Yemen, we have two groups. The challenge that we faced earlier has been emphasized now because of the lack of the government's institutions. Today we have two groups, the Gulf group, represented by Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE and the KSA, as well as some coordination efforts, as well as different NGOs and donors from the West. There is a weakness in the coordination efforts and there is a gap, and I hope that they would work in unison. And I think the lack of coordination led to the lack of the humanitarian aid and the lack of having a joint vision for reconstruction. If you don't have such a mechanism and such visions, then I think our attempts will fall flat. Specialists ought to have a say, and coordination efforts ought to press ahead in order to bridge the gap between the two blocks. As a matter of fact, I would like to thank you in particular for touching upon international development, and you are an advisor in this domain. I do understand that this is a stumbling block in the reconstruction efforts in all across the world, actually. And I do remember that this was a stumbling block in Afghanistan in terms of the stability efforts. We had plenty of development programs in Afghanistan, and one of the most important problems that we encountered was to do with coordinating such efforts. This is a challenge that is continuous, that is there time and time again when it comes to reconstruction, and Yemen is not an exemption in this regard. I think if we get to a stage whereby we could be adept at coordinating these efforts, I think this, to a great extent, will resemble a solution. Here, I ought also to remind myself and the others of the reconstruction theme that took place after the signing of the Gulf Initiative and the commitment of the international group of pressing ahead with the reconstruction efforts. The international conference held at that time talked about contributions or pledges to the tune of 7 billion for reconstructing Yemen, or starting the process of reconstruction. And we do hear now, and we have heard from Mr. Hadi, the spokesperson of the government, Mr. Rajah. He said that the government's coffers have a mere $1,000. So the pledges that were earmarked were not there. They did not pour into Yemen. 10% only reached Yemen from the total amount, and we are surprised why things are as they are. I think that alluding to this fact is very important. We need to yes, please. Yes, we need to focus on this aspect. We had an experience since 2011 up until 2015. I call the other stage transition 2.0 because we had transition 1.0. We need to derive the lessons. We have to learn the lessons. We cannot reinvent the wheel. All the discussions that we are talking about are similar to the 2011 discussions. Here, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about economy and all the rest of it. Reconstruction efforts and development and the role of the donors and the role of the coordination part. We need to learn from our mistakes and we need to build the transition 2.0. Otherwise, our efforts will be futile. With transition 2.0, we'll perhaps throw the floor open. We hope that we won't end up having transition 3.0. Anyway, I would like to thank the panelists for this for these interventions. I will open the floor for the questions and answers.
لا هيو مايك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شكرا.
Thank you. I thank the panelists. It's the irony of fate that the countries that support legitimacy in Yemen are the same who support those who are against legitimacy in Egypt. This is a real tragedy that has become a comedy. If I speak to you about Egypt, people would congratulate you. Aden will not work because what's happening in the Suez Canal will not be allowed by the Emirates, and Dahlan is leading Daesh in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. I would like to thank the panelists for the invaluable information they give. I would like to hear what Mr. Raj think about the economic situation in the country. Is there sort of balance and agreement with the state and the Houthis and even Al-Qaeda about the incomes and distribution of salaries? This agreement cannot develop and reach a political understanding between the Houthis and ISL, or Al-Qaeda, sorry. And what about other countries such as Saudi Arabia, and what do they think about this economic understanding or agreement between? Thank you. I want to ask a question for each one of them. Yes, ask the questions you have. Mr. Rajah, I am optimistic that there will be an end to this war, and I'm asking about the transitional period. What do you say about where can in Yemen one put a line, draw a line between we as Yemenis take the responsibility of rebuilding our country, and how can we stop any foreign intervention in our affairs, or to accept their support but with some limits. So what do you think about these limits of these lines between responsibility and intervention and non-intervention? My question to Rafat, you focus on employing the youth to give them back hope. Can you elaborate on how one can do such a thing and intervene? For example, in employment, how can we bring back hope to the people at the time the war is going on? It has not stopped. As to my question to Ayona,
you view your role as an instrument for amplifying the voices on the ground of what they are suffering from, and you've elaborated on that very well. Can you also speak of what you've seen while you were there in terms of how the people, despite all this struggling and suffering, how they've also strived to repair as much as possible of the social fabric that is tearing, as you explained? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Muhammad.
Dr. Muhammad, I give you the floor. Thank you. I thank the Brookings Center for organizing this very important event, and I thank the panelists, all of them, for what they have, for the information they have provided us with. Unfortunately, I am just listening from the beginning up to now, people speaking about development, reconstruction, humanitarian aid, etc., etc. But one cannot have development with the war going on. One cannot have reconstruction while the war is going on, because it will destroy everything. There won't be any reconstruction or development or political authority that when the political authority cannot achieve a good coherent society within. The presidency is shaken, is losing its balance. It cannot give any initiative, neither in development nor in the continuation or stopping of the war or international cooperation. And in my opinion, and as I follow up things, I've never heard from the Yemeni presidency any position except one word, that they want the implementation of UN Resolution 2216, whether in the Geneva conferences or elsewhere. We are now speaking about the countries that are helping Yemen, such as GCC countries. These people also have international pressures on them. For the first time, we see that these international pressures on these countries are to stop the fighting in Yemen, while as these same countries are helping to continuation of the war in Syria and in Iraq without anyone stopping them, neither by the Security Council, which is controlled by the 5 permanent members, neither the General Assembly that has not been called to save peace in Iraq or Syria or elsewhere. So I say to the panelists, thank you for the efforts you made, but the real questions was not tackled. What is the project for the Yemeni presidency to manage or run this conflict? Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad. We'll answer these questions and come back to you. So there's a question to you, Mr. Rajah. What is your project? And this is I added to what said by Dr. Muhammad Musfar. Where are we heading? Why don't you go back to Aden? What is the solution? What is the vision, the presidential vision here? Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. I speak about going back to Aden. I would say that most of the members of the governments are in Aden, despite the difficult situation that Aden is suffering from. But what I say is that I repeat this, that we are a government that have no resources at all. We cannot hear Mr. Mohammed. So I'm speaking as a system, as a legitimate presidency and government. As for reconstruction, lately we have done a lot of work with the General Secretariat of the GCC countries for the preparation, organizing the international conference for reconstruction of the country. And when the first visit we made to Aden, there were still some pockets of the Houthis were still fighting. When we found all this destruction, the Prime Minister said clearly that this government, and we'll be honest with the Yemenis, will not be able to rebuild or reconstruct Aden. The war in Yemen is a fierce one. There's a lot of destruction, real destruction. The government has no revenues, and as you know, the government of Yemen depends on the importation 180,000 barrels of petrol every day that the people depend on. Now, in this 180,000, with the present prices, are not we cannot even export these quantities. And there are some of the oil wells are in the conflict zones and where the Qaeda is controlling. One of the main ports to export the petrol, Dhabba in Makalla, is still under the control of Al-Qaeda. The Yemeni state have no revenues, official revenues, so we do what we must do with the help of the GCC countries in principle, because they are the main supporters that are making our government able to work. So we are going into a political war and a military war. That's why the situation is very difficult. But there's an effort made, and there's a vision prepared for reconstruction that was presented to the General Secretariat of the GCC countries, and why Dr. Abdulif Zayani called for an international conference for the reconstruction of Yemen. I'm not saying that the presidency or the government in Yemen are doing what they should do no, they're not, but the conditions are imposed on them, make them. This is a government in diaspora, and the ministers, some of them are in Aden, some of them in Sumatra, some of them in Riyadh, some of them in Abu Dhabi. So the situation of Yemen at the present time is something unprecedented for any government in Yemen in all its modern history. What we are betting on is our brothers in the GCC countries, and I think they have learned their lesson. In 2011, when they presented the Gulf Initiative, it was a hope to save Yemen and to integrate Yemen within the GCC system, but so that Yemen would be left to the hands of the others, Iran or else. But our bad luck was that we are a poor country in a rich environment, and this environment, unfortunately, did not look upon us the way we deserved as neighbors and as geopolitical position. That's why so the relations with us were not as they were during the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh. But unfortunately, once the initiative was signed by the Gulf GCC countries, they left it, they just handed it over to the United Nations, Jamal Abu Umar, the envoy. And that's why part of what we have, the reason of this, of what we have come to now, is that the Gulf Initiative was not followed up by the people who developed it, I said, the GCC countries. That's why we think that now there is a change in the relations between the Yemen and the Gulf GCC countries, and the best proof is that the storm of resolve. And we always hear from the commanders and leaders of GCC countries that Yemen will not be left or abandoned, because they represent the heart of the Gulf. And we frankly say that we are a country with no resources. We need help to reconstruct our country.
I know you've already answered it really, but yes, I think we're wildly optimistic to sort of sit here and talk about reconstruction when there is no end in sight of this current conflict. It's all a bit Alice in Wonderland. I think certainly what's been shown to us in the 2 attempts in Geneva is that both sides are still pushing for a military end to this, and that the political discussions are secondary to that motive. And so what does that mean? What is going to happen now? I think the push for Sana'a is inevitable, but I think it's when, not if. It could be many months, if not even years off, if you're really being pessimistic about it. So yes, we're a long way from even reaching near the end of this conflict, I think. And I think you have to be realistic about what's going to happen now. And that's why I tried to push on this humanitarian aspect, because really, if the war ends in 2 months or in 2 years or in 10 years, the humanitarian situation has to be faced and it has to be dealt with. And the rest of it is, yes, could take a long, long time to even reach the point where you're really doing active rebuilding, whether that's infrastructure-wise or anything else. Yes, it's happened to a point in Aden, but I think it's a long way off before that's happening in the rest of the country at this stage. Just to go to the question about the social fabric, as one of the most depressing parts of seeing that happen in Yemen, there have been attempts, particularly actually by the youth, to challenge those divisions that are being created in society, whether that's through artists, whether that's through workshops. But of course, that's a very fringe, small element of society where that is happening. And it's really hard to try and save that social fabric whilst the conflict continues. So the more it goes on, the more it's going to be broken and shredded. And even certainly from what I've seen, the youth realize the urgency of trying not only to prevent that from happening, but trying to repair what has already happened. But they are very much in the minority, and of course, that's normally happening in the cities and urban areas, and the majority of Yemeni's population are rural, and that's where a lot of the fighting is going on in sort of tribal areas. And you've got tribal groups that are trying to be persuaded to join one side or the other, and again, that tears at the social fabric when you're dealing particularly, I think, with international forces. It's something I've spoken about before, but Yemenis know that as foreigners, we always see it quite comically, the way the Northerners fight in Yemen, you can have tribes fighting for many days, weeks, months, or even years, historically, and not a lot of people die. They realize, through tribal etiquette, the consequences of fighting, and a lot of the time it's about the appearance of war and the theatre of it. When you bring international forces into that, that's not how they work. You don't go by those gentleman rules of engagement that the northern Yemeni tribes have. And that's what really risks the social fabric, I think, in Yemen now, is the way the fighting is happening on the ground that really tears families and villages and towns apart. And I think it's a massive challenge. I don't know how you're going to prevent that from happening. I really do not know the answer to that question, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Yana.
يعني بشكل سريع.
I know that the time is tight. However, for clarification purposes, I do not think that anyone is optimistic or naively rather optimistic. No, we are not. But perhaps we need to be realistic to a certain extent. This is the reality and we cannot change it. The war is cracking ahead and we don't know when it will end. We have two options. Either we say nothing to the public, we say we can't do anything, no options, and then we corner them. And the other option is to have alternatives that are possible. Talking about development, talking about real estate projects and economic plans. No, we're not talking about these issues. However, we're talking about the economy in the shadows of the war. We cannot have a zero-sum game. We there are something that might be done. I'll go back to the first question. What kind of issues can be settled and what's to do? There are some channels that we can utilize. There are some internal capabilities. Semi-governmental agencies or NGOs that are local, they have proved that they are capable of doing something. In April 2011 up until August, Yemen was far away from any foreign intervention, and all the NGOs left Yemen indeed at that time, and we had no aid whatsoever, no pledges. However, the Yemenis coped with what took place in that period. The private sector, the youngsters, the activists resorted to certain solutions that are still there up to this moment. So we want to support these efforts to find solutions in order to revitalize the hope. The other issue is as follows. After the war has ended, we cannot think then that what kind of plans are in place. If we are able to think now in a preemptive kind of manner and have plans in place, then we can put them on paper. Why not? And then when the war ends, then we can put them into reality. I personally understand this indeed.
And I think this is a very important point, especially that civil wars sometimes take long times and periods. And the Lebanese civil war, the period was 15 years, and many countries, the civil war lasted 20, 25 years. In the light of this situation, it's possible that we find an encouragement of the trade of death, and this means makes the settlement of the conflict very difficult. That's what we need. Need are some parallel solutions and settlements that might help. So the focus should not be only the economic side, but also on the political side. But I think integration might lead to good results. If you allow us, the last one or two questions, we promised these two people, the lady and Dr. Muhammad Musfar. Only if you have questions, we need to put an end to the session. Okay, Dr. Abdullah also. We cannot neglect his question. We must have listen to the voice of women in all our meetings.
Everything. My question is to Dr. Rajih, as he works in the Yemeni government. Now, as Mr. Rafat said, that in order to find jobs, my question is that in order to find jobs for the youth, which is actually difficult as now in the period because of the war, and in order for the businessmen again to come back in the country, which is impossible right now because of the political instability, and also in order for the fighting factions to stop the besiege, we need to make them less angry, I do have to say. And not only that, and also in order not to waste the Yemenis' weaponry power, as Mr. Rafat said before, and especially because that's the only thing that they do have.
The question.
Yes, I'm going to the question, but I do have to say that, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And as Mr. Rafat also said before, that al-Mubadarat al-Khalijiyya, they did not take place, and also because the Houthis, they do not comply to the external agreements as Geneva II, as you said, Mr. Rafat. So my question now is, isn't it very, very, very effective for the Yemeni government to ask the external countries who actually interfere, militarily intervene in the Yemeni conflict? Isn't it better to ask them to stop intervening? The countries who intervene militarily, isn't it better to ask them to stop intervening?
Thank you very much. Shukran.
مرة أخرى آسف للتدخل لكن
Again, I'm sorry to be, but I have 2 points. First, that this is the project of the intellectual and the Yemeni businessman. This is for the future, for the period of the post-war, and not for right now. That's why I say that when the presidency has a project, when the Yemeni presidency has a project, they should begin with this about what will they do if, when, or if then the war comes to an end or is forced to come an end. The other point, I want to say to the minister, you spoke of Iran. All the indications say that Iran does not have a finger or two in Yemen, but have the whole arm or both legs in Yemen. They have spoken of this and this was said by all the Iranian officials. And second, the channel between Oman, Sana'a, Tahran is there. It is there, and one cannot overlook it. Smuggling of people, weapons, money, coming to Yemen is not denied by anyone, and the best proof is that the ship that was captured 2 days ago and the other one that was captured in the Arab Sea. So we say that there is an Iranian political, financial, military presence, and there are even Iranian individuals that are that were imprisoned or released from the prisons by the Houthis later on. So there is an Iranian intervention that cannot be denied. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. Last question. It will be the end, last one. I begin my question by the end of Mr. Muhammad's statement, who was a dear friend, that after the war has come to an end, what is the vision of the businessmen, for the businessmen to come and the capital to come back to Yemen? There are things more important than that. What will be the form and the state that will be there after the war? What kind of settlement might bring Yemen to safety and stability? Are we thinking of 1 Yemen or 2 Yemenis, or more than that? What is the vision regarding the war criminals who have launched this war? How will they be dealt with, whether Houthis or not? So there are so many other topics that are more important and deeper than just investments and drawing investors. So there are other issues that we discussed, and as Oman was mentioned, I am from Oman. I must say that Oman has a big role in achieving a settlement for this crisis. It has never entered the war, but was not against it, and has stood with the GCC countries. The GCC countries have their own position, but being accused that we deal with Iran in supporting the Houthi, I think this is a big exaggeration, and we must know that Oman is one of the GCC countries. We cooperate with the GCC countries in all brotherhood, and we have sort of sensitivity about some issues as we have good relations with Iran. But saying that we have a role in supporting one side at the expense of other is not true. Last simple question. Who are we fighting in Yemen? Are we fighting the Houthis or Ali Abdullah Saleh? Isn't this exaggeration? Are the Houthis so strong? Isn't it being exaggerated? They're just a small group. Are they so powerful, really? And where is the legitimacy of the state to leave such a small group as the Houthis to control the whole state? Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
There are plenty of questions, and indeed this discussion is very important, and this adds to its importance. I would like to add to Dr. Abdullah's question. Don't you fear that if, God forbid, the war perpetuates, don't you think that the Yemen will be divided? Another southern Yemen and a northern one with different borders if the war still goes on. Just to build upon Dr. Abdullah's question, yes, please, I know that the time is nearly up. Please, could you answer straight to the point? Could you answer the questions that were posed? I would like to answer the last question. Who do we fight in Yemen? We fight the Houthis and Saleh. Saleh had a counter revolution against the youngsters who toppled him. The Houthis had a counter revolution of the September revolution that toppled Hamid ad-Din's family in 1962. There is a coalition between the 1962 and the Houthis. Saleh took the helm of power for 33 years. We do not fight individuals. There are indeed individuals, but they have the government's capability. I'm talking about 52 brigades that are under the power, under the control of Saleh, and they are facing the national army and they facing the coalition forces. So it has nothing to do with individuals. The capabilities of the government was kept by Ali Abdullah Saleh, and the Houthis joined in. Sorry, we didn't hear what the gentleman said, but the answer is as follows. No, he's saying no. We are fighting in Ma'rib, we are fighting in Aden, in Abyan, and in Shabwa. The arms that was in the possession of the army was handed over to the Houthis by Saleh. The national army is liberating Yemen. This is one point. The other point, what comes after the war? We have negotiated with the Houthis at the national conference, and we had the outcomes of the national dialogue conference, a federation that covers 6 provinces, and we had a constitution in place. The constitutional committee resided in the UAE for 3 months to finish the draft, and when we handed over the first draft and wanted to apply the outcomes, then the Houthis and Saleh toppled the table and had a coup in place. We had a project, we had a constitution, we wanted a referendum, and we have an outcome of the national dialogue. So we cannot think of the status quo. We could have cleaved to the outcomes, but the Houthis and Saleh were able to pull the Yemenis to war again. So we have a roadmap. However, the deviant group was represented by the Houthis and Saleh. Yona?
As a journalist, we look for evidence, or I try to anyway. And you can never make a claim about something being certain unless you have that evidence. And as far as Iranian involvement in Yemen is concerned, for 4 years whilst I was living there, it was always about trying to find that evidence. And the 2 Jihan boats that you may or may not know of, which were caught trying to smuggle weapons supposedly from Iran to the Houthis, firstly, we were never allowed access to those as journalists to try and independently verify, but also my thinking is if you're the Iranian state and your one boat gets caught, you don't name the second boat, give it the same name when it comes up into Yemeni waters and expect it not to get caught. That's not to say the Iranians aren't involved, but the evidence has been severely lacking. From my own understanding, certainly, I've met people who have taken visits to Tehran over the years for political conferences, etc. Militarily, I think you're certainly looking maybe at advisors and military tactics being advised towards the Houthi Saleh forces. But there is a severe lack of evidence of the whole arm, as you put it, involvement of Iran in Yemen. But that doesn't mean that they haven't got a hand or skin in the game, as we'd say. And I think they've gained a lot for very little input, probably. They can play on this sort of scaremongering, or they can, say things like they now have control of the Yemeni capital, even if they don't, because it's political win for them. So yes, I think generally I would see it as Iranian involvement. They've had to put in very little for a lot of gain, I think.
Thank you, Yona.
Thank you. ردا على بس الدكتور محمد أنا أتفق مع طرحته.
Answering Dr. Mohammed's comment, I do agree any Iranian role is a negative one, and I said that there was no positive provision, and they had no people's incubation or incubators or support in Yemen. I think that Iran won't have a role in the future, and we cannot allow it. We cannot allow consultations with the Iranians when it comes to the outcomes. Just a clarification. When it comes to Dr. Abdullah, I do agree with you. It is very difficult to have plans in place in light with the different circumstances and the changes. We look at the scenario planning, and it is not easy to bring back the investments. We need to have studies in place to understand what took place in the first transition period, what were the challenges, the loopholes, the shortcomings, and we need to learn the lessons, as I said. And in conclusion, on a positive note, I would like to say that Yemen, regardless of what took place in this year or the year before, here we're talking about a civilization that is deep-rooted. Yemen will be there, and it will still be there regardless of what takes place. We need to look at the civilization-related nuances. Yemen will be there, and regardless of what took place, this civilization will still be there. We need perhaps to look at the peacock rather than looking at his feet. On this positive note, we need perhaps to see the Ma'rib Dam revived again, and perhaps Yemen will come back to the fore of our region with its splendor. We hope that it will be stable, it will be developed, and we hope that Yemen will represent our civilization and will provide goodness. The Yemen as-Sa'id, or the happy Yemen, will come again. And with this positive note, we'll conclude this session. And I have to remind you that the second session is in cooperation with the Gulf Center of Studies in the Qatar University. Let's move geographically from Yemen to Washington. The second discussion will be tackling the issue of Dr. Abdullah. You can use the microphone, please. We'll be talking about the elections and the impact of the elections on the GCC countries. Venue, please, and timing. This 22nd in Qatar University. Thank you very much indeed, and the session is adjourned.
وتفاعلكم مع هذا النقاش، وأشكر المتحدثين، ونتمنى إن شاء الله أن نلتقي عن قريب في حلقة نقاشية أخرى، وشكرا لكم. وهناك أيضا ريسبشن، تفضلوا. شكرا كثير.